Okay, so hi everyone, good morning. Very excited to be here to present our just published study, finally, thanks God, on how we could combine social and ecological information to inform priority areas for human-crocodile conflict. And we're gonna use a study case from Indonesia. So just a quick one, when we're talking about human-wildlife conflict, we usually remember like tigers, lions, elephants, orangutans, because I'm from Indonesia. But actually, crocodiles itself, like highly involved in conflict. And of course, after snakes. And saltwater crocodile, the largest species of crocodilian, is actually like one species that has like one of the highest report cases of attacks on human. Especially in Indonesia, we have like the largest archipelago country, and we are the hotspot of crocodile attacks. And can be like a lot of like, there's so many factors that could explain the attacks, like loss of habitat, prey depletion, or like increasing human activities. And that's not only happened in Indonesia, but also happen in other countries where the crocodile lives. So the thing is, human-crocodile conflict is very complex situation. It's not all about like crocodile attacking human. It's about like how people perceive, tolerate, and act towards the crocodile. Usually, when crocodile attacks human, it always ended up with crocodiles being killed. So it's not a simple situation, and we really need to integrate the human dimension of these dynamics. Our study aims is trying to combine the social information, where we're going to use the media reporting, and the ecological information, where we're going to identify the attack hotspot to identify where is actually, if we want to prioritize our conservation intervention, where it will be in Indonesia. So we're going to do a nationwide scale study, very ambitious. So this is the method. We studied by the ecological data, the crocodile attacks data. So we started by focusing our study area across Indonesia, where we have the current distribution of crocodiles. So we have a grid of 50 kilometers, and then we collect the data of crocodile attacks in the 10 years period using 3 different sources. So mostly coming from the media reportings, and then the field survey, and lastly from the local correspondent, usually from the forestry department. Then we use a data analysis where we use like a really cool hurdle model with basically 2 different models into one framework. For a grid cell where we have no record of attacks, we could estimate the attack's occurrence probability. And for the grid cell where you have a record of attack, we could estimate the number of attacks. And we use different covariates to explain these patterns. We studied from environmental covariate, human activities, and also we account for reporting effort, which represented by the cellular network coverage. Then for the social, here's the catch. We want to identify human dimension across like a whole nation, and Indonesia is not a small one. Usually people use attitudes or tolerance, but you cannot really do that in such a large landscape. You cannot do a social survey. You can if you want and you have a lot of money, but we don't. You could, it's very difficult to do that. So we use the media reporting as like media, as study suggested, they could represent public opinion and also might shape people's tolerance towards wildlife. So we use a media reporting from 3 years period, and we're focusing on the headline. Because headline is literally the first thing that people will see when they read an article. We look at the tone, we're trying to see the tone of the headline. If they are negative, like you see this one, they use a sensational news. They use like such a negative term, like torn to death, deadliest crocodile, and all of that we think would absolutely affect people's tolerance or perceptions. And then we calculate the index of negative reportings. This is very simple one, and we have like from 1 to 0, 0 to 1, which 1 is basically like you have like a really intense negative reporting. So the next step is literally combining these 2 information. So we have like index of reporting and also like crocodile attacks. And then we are interested in the high area, where you might find an areas where you have like a repeated attacks of crocodile, but also you have a lot of negative coverage, which might represent a lower public tolerance. So how's the result? In the 10 years period, we recorded almost 700 cases. Half of them almost fatal, and most of them involve male victims. It always happens in activities like where people having activity inside or like near water body. And usually it's always like a routine activity like people working or cleaning themselves. The trends is increasing over the year and mostly coming in the wet season, usually because like that's when the crocodile get entering the breeding period. So they are more territorial or they are moving quite a lot. And this is the attack hotspot map from our model output. If you see the red grid cell, you could see that actually the attack hotspot in Indonesia for crocodile is quite distributed across Indonesia, mostly in the western part and also the central part of Indonesia. And in detail, when we see that actually attack focus occurred more in area where you have like habitat degradation or like disturbed habitat, moderate number of humans, because it's very makes sense, because like in the city where you have like a high human density, the population already gone. There's no crocodile anymore. And lastly, this is an interesting finding because most of our data coming from the media reporting. So people need to report to the journalists or like to the local correspondent. And we found in our cases, like in the eastern part of Indonesia, we know there's quite a lot of cases of attacks, but it's not really reported because the signal or like the cellular network in that area is not as good as in the western part of Indonesia. So when we come into the social aspect, you could see that most of the negative media reporting actually coming in the western part of Indonesia, but not so much in the central part. And when we combine them together, we could see that actually the high-risk area represented again in the red cells are mostly focusing on the western part of Indonesia, especially in the eastern part of Sumatran Island and Kalimantan. So what's next then? Our study actually trying to apply socio-ecological framework to really identify the priority risk area of human-crocodile conflicts. So we use a publicly available data because most of our data coming from the media reporting. And then if you see that if we only focusing on the attack hotspot, which is the ecological information, you have like such a large area to cover. And we know that conservation is like we have limited resources. We need like to be more focused on the specific area. And when we combine these two information, we actually have like a more specific area that we can focus if we want to mitigate the conflict in the future. And I want to bring you to like one specific area in the eastern part of Kalimantan. So if you don't know that we're going to move our capital city from Jakarta in Java like to East Kalimantan. And surprisingly, it's actually within the high-risk area that we identify. There's a lot of cases of crocodile attacks and a lot of negative media reportings. And we will expect when the capital built there, more people will come, more development will happen, and of course, like more interaction will happen. So the good thing about this study is like we work closely with the government. So the Ministry of Environment and Forestry already aware of this result, and we hope like by knowing this, they will find they will have like a mitigation measure to ensure that the conflict won't increase in the future. And lastly, what I would like to say is, working on this study, we realized that there's so many works to do, so many knowledge gap that we need to address, which I would say like is a work that we need to do in the future, maybe of interest for you guys, and maybe like a potential collaboration in the future. The first one is like how we could account for reporting bias. We have some area where we do our field work, we have a lot of data. But like in other area, we usually have underreporting data, especially like in the East Indonesia, because we don't have a lot of media report, then don't have a lot of local networks there. Occupancy modeling that account for detection bias will be one of the solutions that we would like to try in the future. The second one is like we make assumption, and we acknowledge that in our study, that we assume media headline tone could represent public tolerance, but we did not test that in our study. And this is like a future work that we need to try, and I have talked with some people in this conference that we don't really have that kind of study for human-wildlife conflict at the moment. And lastly, if you want to have a more effective mitigation in the future, it's really important to combine this quantitative study with qualitative study, because conflict is local specific, right? It's very like depends on where they are. So integrating qualitative study to better understand the dynamics of the interaction would really help us to develop a more effective mitigation measure in the future. And lastly, I just want to say like this framework is openly available. I'm happy to chat about this one. We really encourage you to adapt and of course improve this framework. And it's not only for crocodile, it's not only for reptile, but it can be used for other species in other landscape. So that's all from us. Thank you. On time.
Yeah, well done. Well ahead of time. So any specific questions for Ardian? Yeah.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. My question is, what actions or mitigation methods are used to mitigate this conflict, human-crocodile conflict?
Yes, in Indonesia it's quite challenging to be honest. Like we have built some like kind of like a cage. Like so we build like a fences in area like in the river where people usually taking bath or like cleaning or washing their clothes. But like a large scale mitigation approach to prevent the conflict is not really. We don't really have that in Indonesia at the moment. So the usual thing is like if there's any crocodile attacks, people will catch the crocodile, move them into captive, or like just kill them at the moment.
I think it's the same method applied in Tanzania. We use crocodile enclosures.
Yes.
Yes. It is built and in the points where people fetch water, use rivers or lakes. Water points.
Yeah.
It's widely recommended. It's not evaluated, which we need to do. Usually maintenance is the problem.
Yeah.
And with social research we need to do on why some people do use them and why other people don't, and there are potentially gender and all kinds of caste in India. There are many issues about who's allowed to and who uses these and not, but I would love everyone to learn a bit more about this in their local area. We'll take a question there.
Yeah, thank you for the wonderful presentation. You have mentioned about negative reporting. Any actions in addressing the challenge?
Is there, sorry?
Dealing with negative reporting. Any suggestions on how to?
Yeah, it's actually like one of the idea that we were thinking is like a capacity building for the journalists. So we're targeting the journalists and the editor of mass media. It has been proven in India. If you know, Fidi Atreya already done a very impressive study on like how the intervention to the journalists and media actually like really change the way they report human-leopard conflict in India. We have done some workshop before on how we could better report human-wildlife conflict, but not specifically on human-crocodile conflict. I'm doing tiger. And also like the thing that we have done at the moment is like we contacted the Society of Environmental Journalists community, and we were kind of like talking about the potential collaboration on how we could better report human-crocodile conflict in the future.
Yeah, we've got a couple of guys on our task force. We're not a task force, we're a specialist group now, who are focused on exactly this. So have a look at the guidelines. There's a section in there, and it's something we're working on and building on, and asking people not to say that the river is infested with crocodiles. It's where they live. We have time for I think one more.
Thank you very much for the good presentation. What are you doing, to the community to make sure they are aware of all these dangers? Let me take an example of Zimbabwe. What we are doing is we are intensifying our education campaign throughout the whole communities to make sure they are aware of the dangers in crocodiles. So what are you doing to make sure you have these mitigation factors to the communities?
Thank you for the question. It's a really important steps to do after the study. I must admit that I'm more like the scientist. So we use this study as a baseline for future mitigation. I'm not involving like in the community engagement related to human-crocodile mitigation. Some of my friends, the co-author of this study, have done quite a lot, especially like in a specific area in Indonesia, where like what you also doing, like having an education and awareness about the importance of taking care, like how you need to behave in area that you know that crocodile is around there. But yeah, I agree. There's a lot works to do in the future, and we kind of like trying to hope to collaborate with more local partners on how we could kind of like raise the awareness of the community and engage them for like future mitigation.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Yeah.